I am Chris Patton. I am CEO of His Way at Work. Welcome to the Eternal ROI podcast. Today we've got a great guest with us. His name is Scott Barr. Scott is calling in from San Antonio, Texas, and he is the Steward of Southwest Exteriors. So I'll have him explain that here in a second, but let's bring him in. Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for showing up today.
You're quite welcome. It's great to be with y'all.
Well, we appreciate you. I know quite a bit about your business. I have seen a good bit of feedback and just news over the years, and you guys do a fantastic job. So I'm excited to dig into what makes that tick, what makes the magic at Southwest. But I want to give you a chance first, Scott, to introduce yourself and just a little bit about your role there, but also what is Southwest Exteriors and what makes it special.
Very good. Yep. So Southwest Exteriors is a replacement contractor, and we specialize in the replacement of siding, windows, and doors. And we've grown from one business unit or one company into three. And our second business unit does concrete floor coatings, which is primarily garages. And then our third business unit does shutters and blinds. So we're experiencing significant growing pains right now, but that's where we're at. So that ties into our long-term vision, where in November 2008, it's a long story how we got to that point, but in November 2008 was the first time that we communicated to our team that we're converting our traditional owner-operated contracting business into a team-led model that can be duplicated and multiplied for the purpose of learning how to build the business as an economic engine to fund ministries and to develop kingdom leaders living on mission. So that's been over 14 years ago. Actually, this month is our 14th anniversary, so it comes around quick. So it's been a long, painful, messy journey, but we're making slow progress. So
that's fantastic. So what's your role there, Scott?
Yep. So my title is the steward, and we now have an advisory board. It's not a governance board yet, but I'm on the advisory board. So we have the CEO that reports to the advisory board. And then we have three managing partners for each business unit. So that's the organizational structure. So my title is steward of the business, as I know y'all believe as well, that everything we have belongs to God. And it's a matter, are we going to be a good steward or a bad steward of what he's entrusted us with? So that's where that came from. Plus, I love it because it's a great conversation starter when you hand out your business card, because some people say, what does that mean? So it's a great opportunity to explain what that means. So
yeah, that's fantastic. So you started this back in 2008, 14 years ago.
Yep.
Tell me what led to that decision.
Yeah, so I would say I have to go back farther in the journey. So basically, grew up in the church, and what I experienced was what I would call a lot of on the outside, everything looked good, but the outside perception did not line up with the inside reality. Mm-hmm. And I experienced that in my family, and I used that as, I didn't see the fruits of the Spirit in my home. There wasn't a lot of joy and a lot of peace and a lot of love. There was a lot of conflict, unresolved conflict. And so I used that as an excuse. If this is what being a Christian is all about, this is not too much fun. And I am pretty good at having fun, and I love to have fun. So I just made having fun my mission, And so I went down that path and ended up in AA when I was 20. I was on the path of self-destruction, and I was either end up dead or in jail. And long story about how I got into AA, but that was really a starting point. I believe God used the recovery program to get me off the path of self-destruction, but I did not give my life back to God at that point. Promiscuity was one sin that I was unwilling to give up, and that unrepentant sin, in my belief, kept me separated from God. So anyway, fast forward, that was summer of 1982. Fast forward to 1994. I had gotten married in 1991 and married a lady that wasn't following Jesus, and I wasn't following Jesus. It was a recipe for disaster. She has a very strong personality. I have a very strong personality, and Jesus was not the center of our marriage. We were both individually center of the marriage. And so in February of 1994, my grandmother, who I was very close to, probably the one person that, in my opinion, I really experienced unconditional love from, she died unexpectedly. And I had bought the business. I came to work at this business in 1990, basically, as the installation leader. And then 1992, I bought the business. It started in 1989, so it was kind of an early stage business. And So the guy I bought the business from stayed on in kind of a sales and marketing role. He kind of ran the front end and I ran the back end during a buyout season. And so my grandmother died unexpectedly in February 1982. I was in a bad marriage and really struggling emotionally. And after my grandmother died, I just shut down emotionally and the business was struggling. I was deep in debt trying to do the buyout, and she filed for divorce. And then the guy that I bought the business from, I didn't have a non-compete agreement with him, and he started a competing business. His other business opportunity did not materialize, so he said, "Well, I'll just start another business." He took employees and took the customer list, and it was just the most intense pain I've ever experienced in my life. And I believe God used that pain in that season just to break me and start the process of remaking me. So the journey I'm on today really started in 1994, and I could not reconcile the way I was living with serving God. So that started, how do I do that? And so, one of the first steps was getting connected to what I would call a mastermind organization for our industry, where they share best practices and hold each other accountable to executing on plans. And so one thing I learned really quickly is the companies where you have the highest level of profitability and the highest level of owner satisfaction was companies where you have a high repeat and referral rate. So then that's where we started, from being focused on a transaction to focus on a relationship. And that started us down that pathway. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward to 2000, I went to a men's retreat, and it was the first time that I was in the presence of a group of men that were, in my opinion, living an authentic life, and they were sharing things with each other. And it was really authenticity was modeled at this retreat, and I was very attracted to that. I'd never been exposed to that. And that one of the guys who was at that retreat was the executive director of a local ministry called Biblical Leadership for Excellence. And so I started with that ministry, and they teach you, book one is the starting point, is investing your life versus spending your life. And one of the teachings is there's only three things that are eternal. That's God, God's word, and people. And that's what we're called to invest our life in, and things are eternal. So anyway, that started because prior to that, I couldn't reconcile, how am I going to serve God and do what I'm doing? I need to go to be a missionary or go to work at a church. I didn't have any teaching or understanding around integrating faith at work. So that's where that started. And then in 2007, October 2007, C12 opened up in San Antonio. And that's really where I learned to build the business for a greater purpose. Yeah. So through that, got connected into what's called the Strategic Life Plan. And through coaching, that's where we were able to articulate the vision that I shared earlier, that we shared in November 2008. So hope that wasn't too long.
Man, you ran through a lot. And if we had 3 hours, I'd go back and start digging in. I think one thing that I want to just highlight, and we'll move on, but the idea that you had not been exposed to such authenticity and transparency as you were in that group, that resonates. And I think that may or may not be as true for women, but for men, that's a big deal. And once you've seen that, experienced it, you don't ever want to go without it. And I'm in a similar situation and was exposed to that kind of a small group years back. And even moving from Georgia to South Carolina, one of the first items on my list was find that again, right? Replicate that, because it's just so powerful. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I encourage anybody that doesn't have that, go find it. Mm-hmm. But my question next is, so you start the business, or this approach to the business, call it, in 2008, and it was probably, almost 10 years later when you guys started engaging His Way at Work. You were shortly after that into C12. So give me some sense of the path that led up to this engagement with His Way at Work, what kind of a difference that made at Southwest.
Yeah, so I don't remember when I first became familiar with His Way at Work, but there was an awareness prior to becoming active with y'all. But what was really, one of the things that I remember that was really convicting was that it's Peter, right?
Right.
Yeah. So his journey, his experience, where he was doing a lot of good stuff in the community, and there was people on his team that had needs that weren't being met. So I was very convicted by that, because I'm involved in a lot of different things, and too outwardly focused and not focusing on the team. So that was a really convicting piece of it. It was probably the trigger for getting started.
Excellent. So you guys engaged, I think it was in 2018, if I remember right. And what would you say, the biggest difference is in the company after, not immediately after engaging, but within a year or so of engaging His Way at Work and putting the system in place versus before? What's the thing that stands out to you as the biggest difference?
Yeah, great question. So I would say it's having the team be responsible for, what we talk about is we want to make sure that everyone is safe physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and having a construct for that that's not led by ownership or senior leadership, but that is led by the team, and having folks on the caring team from every different part of the business, and where they're truly have the autonomy to make the decisions. And so it's created just a great relationships between team members and the caring team. And so having a caring team that meets the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of the team members has been huge for us.
That's great. So you and I were talking about a week ago, and just kind of prepping for what this would look like and giving you some sense of what the podcast would look like. And I asked you a question. I said, so just give me a sense of what is your passion? And man, you knocked me out of my chair with your answer. Not because it was necessarily the most powerful thing I've ever heard, but it was so quick, it was instant, and it was clear this is what you are after. So share with the audience what that answer was that you gave me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it took us a long time to get here, but what I believe is that we are called to co-create with God an authentic, Christ-centered, loving community in our workplace.
Man.
And there's a life model organization that's does a lot of teaching around this, but the basic premise is that we cannot grow as followers of Jesus without being connected to authentic, Christ-centered, loving communities.
That's fantastic. So I want to break some of that down, because the listeners, some have engaged His Way at Work, some have never heard of His Way at Work, and set that to the side. This concept of loving on employees in the workplace can sound really odd and maybe even out of place. So I want to dig into some of this with you and just get a sense of, from an actual business person doing this day to day, what does it look like? But the first thing you said was co-create with God. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so the idea is that we're not doing this on our own. This is, I believe, is God's design for every home, every business, every church, is to be this authentic community. But we're co-creating with God. It's not something that we're doing separate from God. So that's my belief. That's
fantastic, and it touches on the fact that God is a creator, one, but so are we, right?
Yep.
We don't create something out of nothing, but He works through us in that, and I think that's a fantastic way to word it.
So if you go, like you said, going back to creation, He spoke creation into existence. We have the power to speak things into existence. It first starts with a vision that's communicated, and that's speaking it into existence. That's the starting point. So anyway.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So authentic, Christ-centered in a business. What is that? So one, what does that mean overall? But two, what does it mean to an employee that does not believe in Christ?
Okay. Yeah, great question. So one of the things that we do when there's prospective new team members that we're talking to is we're very clear with them that we only have two core values, and those two core values are love and excellence. And a number of the people that work here and the ownership of the organization are followers of Jesus, but you do not have to be a follower of Jesus to work here. But we do ask you to live out our two core values of love and excellence, and then we go on to explain that. So the idea is that if somebody is not comfortable with that, if they're antagonized by that or they're opposed to that, they're not going to join this team.
Right.
So on our team, and this is kind of the way I frame it up, is you have kind of three categories. You could have somebody that's faith negative, that is opposed to Jesus. You could have people that are faith neutral. They don't really care one way or the other. They kind of need a job, and it looks like a good place to work. And then you have people that are faith positive, that are really, they're here for the mission, not here for the money. Not that they don't need the money, but they came on board because of who we are and what our mission is.
Right.
So what we see over time is those folks that are faith neutral then become faith positive. So
that's a great way to put it.
yeah.
With your permission, I'll be using that quite a bit.
Okay, yeah. And so we try to live as authentically as we can, because the last thing we want to do is be hypocritical. So we don't want to say one thing and do another. And I get people come to me sometimes and say, hey, your actions are not lining up with words, and I want to make sure we celebrate that, because I do make mistakes and I do fall. And then we also don't want to be judgmental. So we don't want somebody to feel like that we're judging them because they don't believe what we believe. So it's that balance between being a hypocrite and being judgmental. So anyway.
That's a great point, Scott. Just this morning in our men's group, the pastor himself was teaching this week, and it's just a 15-minute or so teaching, and then we break up into small groups. But he said, we have recently done a third-party survey in a 15-mile radius of our church, and we just asked residents within 15 miles of the church, what is the number one reason you don't engage in a spiritual community? And he said it wasn't about the rules being too strict. It wasn't about, having to give money. It wasn't about being embarrassed. It was the number one reason was because churchgoers are too judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they walk in the door, they feel judged. And for us to be able to create an authentic Christ-centered workplace, but one where they're not judged if they're not aligned with Christ, if they're not a believer, it's just quite simple. Live out love and excellence, right? And we're going to do the same, and we're going to ask you to hold us accountable to that. That's that authentic piece too, right? So that's really, really strong. So the last part of that is a loving community. At Southwest, what does a loving community look like?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, part of it starts with speaking the truth in love, and we've all heard that. It's very easy to say, but very hard to do. There's a Pete Scazzaro, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, a whole program around we can't grow spiritually unless we're growing emotionally, and so being truly loving is having the hard conversations. It's our love for God can be measured by the way we love people. So it's just, again, going back to that authentic love and compassion, and so that's one of my personal weaknesses and my personal challenge. It's part hardwired into the way in the way God created me, but also my flesh is I'm much too focused on results and not on relationships. So I'm very results oriented and not relationship oriented. So it's a continuous fight and battle to stay focused on relationships and truly loving people for who they are, and they're created in God's image versus what they can produce and what they can do or what they didn't do. So that's a big struggle of mine.
Yeah, and I get that. At the same time, I imagine some of the listeners, business owners, business leaders, saying, okay, I get some of this. I'm a believer in Christ and I want to be loving, but loving in a business, that just seems too soft and mushy and ambiguous. But what I'm hearing you say, and I love you give an example of this, but loving is not just sitting around a circle and singing together. It's not a hug always. It's not a soft and mushy conversation. Love can be, hey, brother, you're not giving your all. You're not putting your heart into this job. You're not showing up on time. You're not being true to your word. You made a commitment here and you're not living up. That's love. It's, I heard it described this way. It's being nice versus being kind. Nice is, well, it's okay. Kind is, no, it's not. I love you too much to watch you do this to yourself. Right?
Yep.
So give me some example of how you guys do that at Southwest. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So I would say, probably, some of my heroes of the faith are Rick and Holly Beatonbow, and I know you're familiar with them, and their whole culture around having a coaching conversation, coaching in the moment. I mean, they're a perfect model for what that's about, in my opinion. And also setting very clear expectations is a loving thing to do. And a lot of broken relationships and a lot of conflict comes from either unclear or unmet expectations. But setting clear expectations and, hey, Chris, this is what I saw, and this is what we talked about. This is what the expectation is, and there's a gap here between what the expectation is and the way you're performing. So let's talk about that. And it should never be a surprise when somebody is not thriving in the organization. If you're not thriving here, there's a place where you can go to thrive. So it's having those hard conversations, but doing it in a loving way. So that's why we talk about in terms of a team versus a family, because a family is, once you're a family, you're always a family. But when you're on a team, you got to perform on the team and be part of the team. So anyway, there's a distinction there.
Yeah,
so
that's good. That's good. But you can feel like family on a team that's caring for each other, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's we have 4 C's to exceeding our clients' expectations, and compassion is the first one that ties into love for that. But it's compassion, cleanliness, craftsmanship, and communication. If we do those things very well, then we're going to exceed the client's expectations, and that's it ties into what we want to do is take great care of our team members who take great care of our clients. So if we focus on providing a great experience for our team members, then out of that flows the great experience for the client. So
yeah, that's
so
fantastic.
That compassion piece is and that's where the caring team comes in. It's a compassionate, a very direct link into being compassionate with the team. So
yeah, and go back to this tough love or this being loving with having truthful conversations. Mm-hmm. You're pairing up your compassion and your communication there, right? As you set clear expectations, you're so much more likely to have unmet expectations when you have lack of clarity of expectations, right? Yep. In general, here's what you go do, and then they don't get it done. You're like, why didn't you get it done? Well, I didn't really have a full understanding of what it was you wanted done. But as long as there's clarity up front and then accountability at the backside of it, there's compassion within that, right? That's the most loving thing you can do is give clear expectations. Yep. So I love the way you guys do that. So here's the thing. As I've been in a family business, right, for 20 years of my career doing something similar to what you're doing today, one of the thoughts I would have had, I believe, in that position prior to seeing business this way is, okay, loving sounds kind of soft in a business, but you've shared what that means. So now I go to, okay, I get that. How do you measure love in a business? How do you measure a loving community, an authentic, Christ-centered, loving community, to know if you're there, or 2, if you're on the path to there, if you're further ahead of that on that path this year than you were last year? How do you guys measure at Southwest this? It's measuring culture, but more specifically, your specific culture.
Yeah, so for us, the best we've been able to do so far, and there's probably better things out there, but we have a tool called Culture 5, a culture index, and we do that monthly. And there's 5 questions that they answer, so it can be done really quickly, and we get a sense for what the team is currently experiencing. And then we're able to, in our individual team meetings, say this is the feedback that we got from our last survey, and there's a number of you that are feeling uncertain, or we're seeing that there's a high uncertainty. So let's talk about what's going on there. So that's been the tool that we've been using to stay connected to that.
All right. So for clarity, you've got 5 questions that are asked of your employees every month. Mm-hmm. And then after you get the results, you're coming back to the team and giving them the overall results. I would assume there's anonymity in the answering, right?
Absolutely.
But you're reporting back to the team, to the employees, here's what you've told us. Mm-hmm. And then you said, and so then we talk about, so take its uncertainty. So what are you feeling uncertain about? And then you're asking people to engage. Who's at the front of the room in that situation?
Yeah, so we have a monthly debrief with the leadership team, and then from there, the leadership team goes to their individual teams. So that's how we do it.
So you cascade it out. That's brilliant.
Right. So you have those deeper conversations about, this is what we're hearing. Let's talk about what people might be feeling or what y'all might be hearing. Because some people, like you said, it's anonymous, and they don't want to say, well, I'm the one that I said I was uncertain, but they say, well, I heard so and so say they were uncertain. It makes it easy to respond to. And then the key thing on this that we've been coached is if we go to all the trouble and get this feedback and receive the feedback and don't take action, then we're going to stop getting it breaks down the loop. So we're going to stop getting the feedback.
That's exactly where I was headed next. Yeah.
We've got to act on what we hear.
So one note, when you do an anonymous survey and you do it frequently, one of the fears an employee will have, and we've seen this, is if it's not anonymous, they're not going to say, I'm uncertain, because they don't know if anybody else is saying I'm uncertain. Right? So I don't want to identify as being uncertain or frustrated or anything that might be perceived as negative or weak. So I won't say a word. If it's anonymous, I'll say it. If I trust the anonymity, I'll say it. And then here's what you're doing so beautifully is in the meeting, you're saying a bunch of you said uncertainty. Now suddenly anyone that said it goes, wow, I'm not alone. Now I'm safe to answer in front of people. Well, I'll tell you what I've heard about uncertainty, and then they go forward. Just a perfect setup, and I highlight that because there's so many ways to do surveys where you don't get accurate results. Yep. You may get what you want to hear, but you don't necessarily get what you need to hear, right? So that's fantastic. The next step, though, is what do you do about it, right? So the worst thing in the world is for anybody listening right now, go back to your business, do an employee survey, get all the results, set them down and say, I'm going to get to that next week, next month. Well, as soon as budget season's over, well, let me get past the first of the year. And you've surveyed, you've asked for responses, and you do nothing about it. So what do you guys do to make sure there's action taken, and how do you follow up on that?
Yeah, so we have a senior leadership team meeting every Monday. And so they review every Monday what the action is for that month to make sure we're following through on that. So, and I'm not in those senior leadership team meetings, but that's the structure. That's
fantastic. But the other senior leaders are. So they're holding each other as peer accountability, right, in that case?
Right.
That's great.
So our CEO and our model is responsible for holding the senior leaders accountable to following through on the feedback. So
that's great. So is there a reporting out to the employees again of what was done? We heard you on this. We've taken a dive into it. We've put this action plan together, and here's the completed result.
Yeah, so that's done a couple of ways. One is through a weekly video update that we do for the team. Our CEO does that. And then the second one is through a quarterly all-team meeting that's in person. We update on that as well.
Man, that's strong. That is really good. So you look back, and you've been doing this authentic, Christ-centered, loving community. How long has that been verbalized as your mission?
It's really within the last year.
Okay.
So it really became crystal clear within the last year.
In a big picture view, what do you see different today than the way things were either for your company or even for your perspective a year or two ago?
Yeah, in terms of living that out, the authentic, loving community. Yeah, I think for me, it's been much more higher accountability for me because, like I've said, I've had this task orientation versus people orientation, and I work with being very attuned and very aware of when I get triggered, and so my stress behavior is to default into bully mode, where I become kind of condescending and ask quick questions, and so that I can't live that way. I cannot do that. And there was a case of that within the last year that was broke my heart, where basically someone said, "Hey, you're not living out who you say you are." So I mean that's a piece of it right there.
Yeah, just without naming names, at what level of the company did that person serve?
Yeah, senior leadership team and one of the leadership roles, and one of the faith neutral.
Fantastic, man. So. Yeah. Just from the outside looking in, that's a huge indicator of a culture where they feel safe, but also challenged and free to challenge back to you. So that's true accountability. A faith neutral senior leader puts themselves at risk by calling out their boss, you're not living out authentically. That's fantastic.
Yep. Yeah,
Man,
it was super painful for me to receive, but that's part of what I've learned in my life. It takes pain for me. Shouldn't be that way, but intense pain leads to change in me. So
yeah, man, that's great. So one of the topics we talked about before we close, we talked about in our call the other day was, and you mentioned this already a little bit, your challenge in your personality to look at driving results versus relationship, right? So the things that we've talked about here today, for the most part, focus around relationship and the culture, which is measurable. You can have results there, but there's still business challenges, right? There's still things that targets you have to hit and so forth. You said something in our conversation I'd like you to expand on. It's along the same line, but a little different phrasing. And you said, I've got to be totally focused in my role on faithfulness versus fruit.
Yep.
So give me a picture, or tell the listeners, what does that mean to you and how do you do that? Faithfulness instead of fruitfulness.
Yeah. So the basic premise for that is that I'm by focusing on results and getting things done, I'm looking down the road at the fruit of what we're doing, and just deeply convicted. This has been a very hard season that we've been in and that I've been in. So just through that pain, it's just a very clear, deep conviction that I just have to focus on being faithful and not worry about the fruitfulness. That's all up to God. It's our job to sow and God's job to grow. So I just got to focus on being faithful, and I've got to focus on out of my intimate relationship with Jesus flows everything else.
Yeah.
And a quick story on that is he's a now 20-year-old son and has had some challenges, mental health challenges. And I was walking and praying one day, and I didn't hear an audible voice, but what my impression was Jesus saying, just focus on your relationship with me. I've got Sammy. I've got your son. Just focus on your relationship with me. So that was, another kind of tie into the same thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. When you said it, it reminds me of John Maxwell's 21 Laws. One of those is the law of the process. And it's the idea that it's the daily small things that we do over time that will eventually produce fruit. But he's the one that brings that fruit. We're just the ones to be faithful, be attached to the vine, so to speak. So I love how you worded that. So you've been fantastic, Scott. You guys do a phenomenal job in your business. I love every time I interact with you guys, I learn something. So thank you for sharing today. I'd like you to answer two final questions. One is, there are other business owners, business leaders listening right now that love what all they're hearing, but what advice would you give them in this situation? They may have a business that they've considered what you're doing at Southwest. They may have been a little concerned or afraid or whatever, but what advice would you give to someone else in your position as it relates to that?
Yeah, I would say that if they believe that they have the opportunity to glorify God in their work, and they see the opportunity to integrate what they believe in their work, then take small steps. I mean, it's that one saying, that old one, that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. Start with the first step, and it talks about having wise counsel, godly counsel in our lives. I mean, I think that's essential. I think, going back to something I wish I knew back then, is that it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. So a lot of us are very self-reliant versus God-reliant, and I certainly struggled with that. And reaching out and asking for advice, asking for mentoring. You can get somebody to meet with you. Just ask them to meet one time and give them the opportunity to pray about it and say, hey, ask them, will you agree to meet with me monthly? I'm not putting you on the spot. Pray about it if you're not open to it. But anyway, be very proactive about asking people that have wisdom and experience, godly people, to pour into them. And most men will. Most men and women that have that experience, they're open to that.
That's fantastic. I was going to ask you, what advice have you been given or learned that you wish you had gotten 10 years earlier. And that's what I'm hearing you say is it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's frankly a sign of strength and wisdom to say, you know what, based on the resources I have and the age and the experience, there are things I don't have because I'm only this old or I'm only this experienced, but I can find somebody a handful of years out in front of me that can help shine the light on my next 5-10 years. And I think that's a great way to put it. And don't see that as weakness.
Yep. And then one other quick thing is just the speed that with which we run. Our culture is busy, and busyness is not healthy for us spiritually or emotionally. So we've got to create time margin to spend time with God, spend time in solitude. There's no easy way around that. Without the spiritual disciplines, we're not going to have an intimate relationship. It's not negotiable. We have to create time, make time. And again, do the habit stacking. Start with one small habit, get that down, and stack another habit on top of it. So
that's good.
It's much easier for me to tell people how to do this than it is to do it, but I know what to do. So.
I understand that. In the book is Atomic Habits by James Clear, right?
Yep, James Clear. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's a great one. Well, Scott, man, you've been awesome today. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you guys are busy, but you've been fantastic. And I know that our listeners have gotten some nuggets here from you. And in fact, our next episode, we're going to be talking to Ryan, your sales leader, who's also the caring team leader at Southwest Exteriors. And we're excited about that conversation too. So if you enjoyed this one, make sure you pick up the next one. Yeah.
Chris, you've been great to work with, as always. I love and respect and have a great deal of admiration for you and your organization. So anything we can do to help, we're here to help.
Perfect. Scott, thank you so much. And for those of you listening, thank you for taking the time to listen or watch. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to another episode of Eternal ROI. If you like what you heard, we would love for you to take a moment and leave us a review and share an episode with somebody you know. If you are inspired to begin bringing the power of God's love into your workplace, take a moment and check out our free assessment at hwaw.com. It'll only take you a few moments. It'll give you a snapshot of what your company looks like and maybe some ways to move forward. Just click on the link in the show notes, and we'll see you next time.